This is the Cabin Island Mystery, Chapter 5. If you'll remember when we left off, the boys had just gotten back to their car to get the boat and go on their little adventure trip, and they found that somebody had gotten in and broken in and thrown all their stuff around, maybe stole things. We don't know yet. And the chapter is called Two Suspects. Stunned, the boys could only stare at one another. Frank turned to Joe and declared, "This reminds me of the damage at Mr. Jefferson's place last night." "It is too similar to be just a coincidence," Joe agreed. "And yet I can't think of any logical connection between the two break-ins. Who's our suspect in either case?" "What are you two talking about?" Chet asked impatiently. Joe quickly told of the incident at Mr. Jefferson's house. "Good night! That sounds a lot worse than this mess," said Chet. "Who'd do such a thing?" "Search me." Joe frowned thoughtfully. "Maybe someone who wants revenge on Mr. Jefferson ransacked his house, then found out Frank and I are going to work on his mystery, so the same creep did this to spite us." "But who?" Chet persisted uneasily. "What about the wise guy we met up on Cabin Island?" Biff put in. "The one who tried to get tough." Joe shrugged and threw a glance at his brother. "Any hunches, Frank?" Frank nodded. "I've been wondering about that big fellow myself. We found out his name, by the way. It's Hanley, and he's been trying to buy the island from Mr. Jefferson." Suddenly Joe gave a start. "Say, we ought to check the boathouse. Maybe—" He stopped in mid-sentence and sprinted off. The others followed, catching up to Joe as he unlocked the door and stepped inside. A chorus of groans came from the boys as they looked from the broken single window to the ice boat. The sail lay unfurled on the floor and had been slashed. It was completely useless. That sail is kind of like their motor. It would be like taking the motor out because the sail is how the boat moves. "I'd like to get my hands on the skunk who did this," Biff stormed angrily. Joe was furious. Some nerve, smashing his way in. Just then a voice spoke up from the doorway. "Hi, fellows, what's going on?" The four turned to see their friend Tony Preto. Tony, a slender, dark-haired youth of Italian descent, stared at the damage with astonishment in his black eyes. "Hi, Tony," Joe said dejectedly. "We were gone for a short time and just got back to find this mess." Tony shook his head. "Tough break. I heard about your trip and came down to see you off." "Any chance you could join us?" Frank asked. "We'd be glad to sail back for you." "No, but thanks," Tony replied. "I promised Dad I'd help him out during Christmas vacation and drive one of the trucks." Mr. Preto was a busy building contractor in Bayport. Despite the unpleasant situation, Chet could not resist a joke. "What's going on in construction this time of year? You building an igloo?" The others chuckled, and Tony said, "When I pulled up in Dad's truck, I noticed Ike Nash and Tad Carson running down the road from here." "Ike and Tad again?" Joe exclaimed. The Hardys' minds filled with questions. Were Ike and Tad the malicious visitors? Did they seek revenge for the damage to the Hawk by disabling the Hardys' ice boat? Or was there a more sinister motive? "They're not going to stop us," Joe said determinedly. "Come on, we'll just have to stow all our gear onto the Gull again." "And we need to make repairs," Frank added. "Chet and Biff, will you take our car and pick up the spare sail in our garage? In the meantime, Joe and I will repack." "Right," Chet agreed, taking the ignition key which Frank handed him. "On the way," Joe put in, "why not buy us 4 police whistles? We may need them for signaling on the island." "And we better replace that window pane," Frank said. "Don't worry about the glass," Tony said. "I have some spare in the truck. I'll fix the window." Frank and Joe resumed packing the Seagull while Tony worked on the boathouse window. As Frank arranged the supplies, he noticed that the seat belts had been cut. "Ah, that's tough," said Joe. "We have no spares." The boys worked in silence for a while. Then Frank said, "Joe, this case troubles me. I can't help wondering if there may be something more behind Johnny Jefferson's disappearance than his grandfather suspects." Joe glanced at his brother keenly. "What do you mean? Do you have a theory?" "No, not yet. But if Johnny is on Cabin Island or has been there, his disappearance may be tied in somehow with Hanley's desire to buy the place. Could be, Joe conceded. Personally, I'd like to get a line on Ike and Tad. I have a feeling those guys are up to something besides getting even with us. But don't ask me what. When the Hardys had finished stowing everything aboard the Seagull, Tony was picking out the last bits of jagged glass from the window frame. Joe helped him install the new pane, and the Hardys reimbursed their friend for the glass. I better go now, Tony said. I'm due to meet Dad on a job. Have a swell time. You bet. Thanks for pitching in, said Frank. Presently he turned to Joe. I have a hunch that we'll find a lot of answers to the mystery at Cabin Island. Yeah, if we ever get there, Joe grumbled impatiently. One more delay and this'll be a spring vacation. Frank grinned. I think we're in business. Here come Chet and Biff with the spare sail. The boys put on creepers and took the Seagull outside, where they began replacing the torn sail. They worked dexterously, though their hands grew red and numb from the cold. This is a rough job, Biff said grimly. It wouldn't be so bad, Frank replied, but some of the rigging's been slashed too. Joe brought a coil of rope from the boathouse and helped his brother repair the damage. Then they reinforced the ruined seatbelts with rope. Not only did those troublemakers delay us, they've made me wait overtime for my lunch, Chet complained. Hey, was any of the food stolen? Frank laughed. As far as we can tell, Chet, every morsel is intact. Evidently, Ike and Tad aren't thieves or gluttons. That's the best you can say for him, Biff said scornfully. Well, we're set for some hard water sailing, Joe announced. The Hardys replaced their tools in a kit. They made sure that the convertible and the boathouse doors were locked. Then the four put on goggles and helmets. Frank took his place at the tiller while Chet and Biff climbed aboard. Joe shoved the Seagull before him with short running steps until the sail caught the wind. Whoa, some load, he gasped, jumping in beside Frank. Full speed ahead for Cabin Island, Chet cried out. I'm starving. The Seagull swooped downward near the shore of Barmet Bay. It was a clear, sharp day, and the sparkling sun made the ice gleam like glass. As the boat passed through the narrow inlet and glided toward Cabin Island, Chet chuckled. I'd like to see Hanley try to throw us out this time. We have the key. Anyone who causes trouble, let him be at him, Biff sang out gaily. Frank looked grave. He pointed to the pine tree where they had parked the Seagull on their first visit. An ice boat was outlined against the dark evergreens. The Hawk. It's been repaired, Frank observed. And ready for more trouble, Joe groaned. They just can't catch a break, can they? I guess we'll find out more next time.